forum was set up by the Mauritius Institute of Directors in 2012 in collaboration with PricewaterhouseCoopers Mauritius. The objective was to identify current issues of concern to directors and to produce guidance notes for directors on such issues. The forum is made up of around 20 members who are directors and professionals with backgrounds in law, economics, finance, accounting, corporate and securities regulation, business and academia, both from the private and the public sectors. The forum has produced 3 other position papers, namely in 2012, 2013 and 2014, on best practice guidelines for the appointment of directors, an ethics guide for boards, and engaging with shareholders, a guide for boards. We wish to thank PwC for their long-standing collaboration with MIoD. We sincerely appreciate this partnership, and without their input and sponsorship, we would not be able to have such high-quality publications and events. Thank you. The position paper that we are launching today is on board evaluation. This is a subject which can be quite controversial. No board is perfect. The main objective of the board evaluation is to make your board the best it can be within the particular governance structure. Directors are being increasingly scrutinized by their shareholders and regulators alike, especially in international settings, or where there has been a perception of poor governance. An effective board creates a performance culture that drives value creation. Board members are expected to be committed, alert, inquisitive, and have sufficient time to devote to the work of the board. This is not always the case. Board evaluations can identify areas for improvement and can lead to the sharing and diffusion of best practices. To be noted that we at MIoD can assist you in your board evaluation exercise. I would sincerely like to thank the editorial team, led by Nafiza Moulon of the MIoD and Aruna Jagannath of PwC, together with several dedicated core members of the forum who have contributed with their insights and expertise. They have spent many hours discussing what to include and what to leave out, and have spared no effort to dot the I's and cross the T's. Thanks also go to the design team for producing an aesthetic layout for the content of this paper. Joining us for this launch today is Seamus, who in a few minutes will deliver a keynote speech. Thanks, Seamus, for responding so positively to our request. We are also very pleased to announce that Seamus will be running a workshop for the MIoD on Friday, the 15th of November, on this topic of board evaluation. We do have a few seats left, so if you want to join us, please hurry. I am now very pleased to invite Michael Ho-Wan-Ko, partner of PwC, to address you.
Seamus, Director of Interim CEO, guests, ladies and gentlemen. PwC purpose is to build trust in society and to solve important problems. Our association with the MIoD is supporting the Directors Forum and helping them to produce this 4th publication of the Directors Forum, this time on board evaluation, is aligned with this purpose. The recent corporate failures have meant that the public has lost trust in board of directors, as well as auditors and regulators and other institutions. So how can the board rebuild that trust? Well, about 2 years ago, 8 professors from US universities published a study that offers some instructive insight on institutional trust. The professors decided to send 185 college students updates about a couple of government agencies they knew very little about. So So in that case, it was Nebraska's state water regulators. Every 3 months for a year and a half, the students received news about the regulator. Compared to a control group, respondents who got the updates reported having more trust in the water agencies, even though their overall trust of the government did not improve. The conclusion of that study is that information and transparency build trust. The more we learn about what's really going on inside an organization, the more favorably we judge it. The study also found out that the people who were skeptical just about everything in life didn't report a big boost in trust in the water agencies, just from learning more about them. So overcoming this general mistrust takes a little more than sharing information. One neuroscientist suggested that we need to develop an emotional connection to regain trust or form a trusting connection with a person. We can do this by engaging in activities that release the chemical oxytocin in our brains, the neuromechanism by which ancient humans decided that other humans were safe enough to work with and trust. The behaviors that induce oxytocin production includes hugs, acts of kindness, and telling emotional stories and showing vulnerability. So other boards telling emotional stories are reporting, and others showing vulnerability by being frank. What do we see in practice? According to the 2019 Stuart Spencer US Board Index report, all but 9 S&P 500 boards, that is 98%, have had some form of board evaluation process. 44% of the same group of companies are reporting some form of individual directors' evaluations. And that has increased from 22% 10 years ago to 38% last year, so now 44%. And 13% of boards disclose that they have engaged an independent third-party governance consultant to facilitate that evaluation process, up from 9% in 2018. So we've done the same analysis for all Semdex companies, and we found that only 77% of Semdex companies have carried out a board evaluation. Some of them are saying, yes, well, they will do it, but they have yet to cross that line. So that compares with the 98% in the US. 44% have reported clearly that they have carried out individual directors' assessments. So this is the same as in the US. But 30% of entities disclose that they have engaged an external consultant, so which compares more favorably than in the US, although we could not determine who did the evaluation for 33% of the boards which carried out that board evaluation. So we still have some catching up to do, particularly as a group of the Semdex companies. So what's the final message from my part? So all this research tells us that if organizations are not only transparent about what they do, but also are forthcoming about how and why they are doing something, they will build trust. At PwC, we believe that robust board and committee assessments are critical to effective board oversight, and by reporting the how and why they are doing the assessments, boards will build trust, and this will have a positive impact on the appeal of the entity with investors. So my advice is that now let's start telling more of these emotional stories, but let's make sure that we are telling the true ones. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I may be Irish, but I speak with a London accent because I grew up in North London. But I was born in Ireland, and I'm very proud of that. So lovely to be back in Mauritius again, some places I recognise. Nice to see you. I think this isn't so much a keynote speech, more some reflections on what I found in this particular area of board evaluation. I'd be very pleased to share with you, to interact with you, to do Q&A as well, and let you know what I think on particular issues. I do about 75% of my work in the UK and 25% of my work internationally, which actually is more than enough, actually, to be away for 25% of the year, working in different jurisdictions is sometimes a little bit of a challenge domestically. The advantage of travelling around the world and doing this work with companies in different economic jurisdictions means that it's possible to take a view on what works internationally and what can only work locally. Okay, I have to say I want to be as controversial as possible because I think that will make you react and ask me questions. So personally, I don't believe in best practice, governance best practice, because that implies that every business model is the same around the world. Whether you're a not-for-profit, for-profit, state-owned enterprise, parastatal, whether you're in India, Malaysia, wherever, it implies that there's just one set of rules that works. And I don't think that's actually the case myself. And I'm doing some training at the moment in a far-flung part of the island called Azuri, and the delegates there are from different parts of Africa, for the most part. And the variety of governance approaches that they are using to address their local issues means that it's very difficult to put it all into one thing called best practice. Okay, so I'll put that out there so you can start throwing things at me now. But to put board evaluation into a context, much of the thinking around governance has come out of the UK. It's not because the big corporate crises and scandals started in the UK. It's just that really we were the first country to start to do something about it. And the UK Corporate Governance Code, which is now 27 years old, is, as a result of a big part of the Commonwealth and Anglo-Saxon countries, is probably the most influential code around the world and shaped more code development than anything else. We have and continue to have corporate scandals in the UK, so I'm certainly not promoting the UK code as best practice, but it does mean that we can offer some thoughts and reflections about what it tells us. And when I work with boards and when I work with directors, I explain to them that although I wouldn't subscribe to the idea of best practice, there is good practice out there, which if we embed it in our own local business model can be best practice for our business model. Okay? And there have been innovations in those 27 years, and there have been other countries, for example, notably South Africa under Mandela and King 1, King 2, King 3 and King 4, where the governance thinking has evolved significantly. And there have been innovations in the world of governance thinking. For example, and I would quote them as the nearest thing you can get to best practice. So some of the thinking is established, like the separation out of the role of the CEO from the chairman. Okay, that is fundamentally good practice. And the fact that it isn't followed in the US is one of the reasons why investors have considerable concerns about US governance. And the fact that the US doesn't allow one vote per share held is another reason why we have concerns about US governance. But there have been other innovations, such as the idea of a senior independent director. You've heard of that, the SID, the senior independent director. Committees to a board are good practice, and they don't exist on the boards, but committees to a board is good practice. The independence of the assurance function, which is something that Mike will know a lot about, is good practice. And these are innovations which evolved over time. They weren't always there. They developed over time. And one of the particular innovations, which I think is particularly critical, is the innovation of board evaluation. Okay? This is where a board holds itself to account in the same way that it holds its management team to account, and in the same way that it holds management in the middle and the workforce to account. And it's coming. Board evaluation is coming. It's coming everywhere. It's all over the world now. And it's something that I would encourage you to think very seriously about. So I really commend this collaboration between the MIoD and PwC in producing this position paper, because this is something which is coming to Mauritius as well as to every other capitalist jurisdiction in the world. It probably doesn't exist in North Korea or in Cuba, but I do talk to my boards about the fact that this is all about capitalism. This is all about money in, money out. Okay? And if there's less money coming in than going out, you go bust. And it's a competitive society, and if the board, the company, doesn't build trust with its stakeholders, there's always somewhere else to go and spend your money. Okay? So board evaluations are a critical innovation now in holding boards to account so that they can develop that trust relationship with their stakeholders. So I wanted to put this into a slightly wider context and then come back to Mauritius. I was reading an article recently coming out of the US again that they do a lot of good thinking, even if they don't do a lot of good practice. And the North American Corporate Directors Association was pointing out the fact that it's about 100 years ago now that the first Model T Ford rolled off the production line, and we had what was effectively the second industrial revolution. And with that industrial revolution in the US came a lot of good top-class management thinking, which has actually influenced us and dominated our thinking around the world ever since. I don't know if any of you are interested in the work of Taylor, McGregor, Mayo, Hertzberg. My first degree was in business, and I loved that stuff that came out of America, which helped us understand better how organisations could be run and should be run. And this article was making the point that we are now entering a critical second stage of organisational development, 100 years on, where we as organisations and as boards, therefore, have to completely rethink the way we are going about things. So we are now actually, as I'm sure you realise, in the fourth industrial revolution. This is the industrial revolution of 5G, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, blockchain, the cloud. It is disrupting our business models in a way that many boards that I work with do not understand and do not realise. I have to point out to an oil and gas company in Qatar that blockchain affects their business model. They, as a board, have not done anything about it. I have to point out to a bank in Bahrain that blockchain affects their business model, and they, as a board, have not done anything about it. And they're going to go bust. They're going to go out of existence. But I'm trying to help avoid that problem. So the point is that this accelerating pace and intensity of change is putting pressure on organisations and it's putting pressure on boards. I have certain mantras I use when I'm working with boards. One is that it all begins and ends with the board. It all begins and ends with the board. Companies don't go bust, boards go bust. And if not the directors, then who? If not the directors who are taking responsibility for their business model, then who is in charge? So we have a system of board governance, and that's the way it works in capitalism. It's called board governance. And that system of board governance is now changing because of the demands which are out there. And I'd like to mention some of those changes which are happening. And I'd like to emphasise the point that this affects all kinds of boards, in all kinds of sectors, in all kinds of structures. So if there's a particularly strong family-owned business culture in Mauritius, This affects family-owned businesses. This affects every kind of business. For example, in the Gulf, 83% of non-oil wealth is generated by family-owned companies. 83% of non-oil wealth. Now, we know when family companies get into difficulty, it's the second or the third generation. So the UAE is the Gulf is facing a time bomb of having to move from family governance to professional corporate governance. If they don't do that, if you don't do this here, then value gets left lying on the table, investors come in and take the value, and family go, and the family has to leave the business. So this is affecting boards in all kinds of sectors, in all kinds of economic activities. And some of the big challenges which I want to put to you, which I'm seeing in the boards that I'm working with, and I have to say this, I think I have evaluated more boards in more international jurisdictions than any other advisor in the world. That's a big claim. I could justify that claim. People evaluate boards in the US and they stay in the US. People evaluate boards in the UK and they stay in the UK. I travel around and evaluate boards in the UK and all around the world. And these are some of the challenges that companies are facing and that boards are facing. So I'm going to put them to you, and I want you to tell me whether you recognise some of these challenges, okay? So, heightened investor expectations and heightened investor activism, okay? Growing social activism, which we are seeing. Look at Hong Kong. The report from the BBC yesterday is that Hong Kong is now in chaos. Okay, it is now in crisis, and they cannot find a way out unless they live in the mad dream. Here's a big one. Navigating generational differences in values. The effect of the millennials on our business model is something that we all have to think about. Millennials think differently, they act differently, and they purchase differently. Do you sit on the board which understands how millennials feel about your business? Social media driven hyper transparency. There is no place left to hide. There used to be somewhere you could hide 10 years ago, but not with this anymore. If something goes wrong with your business model, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you have about 1 hour on Facebook and about 5 minutes on Twitter before you are toast. Unless you have your value narrative out there, if something goes wrong, you are toast on social media. How many members of the board understand social media? I don't know if you remember when Zuckerberg was interrogated by the House last year for the Cambridge Analytica scandal with Facebook, that none of the people interviewing him understood Facebook and understood how social media worked. And by the way, that was a governance issue inside Facebook. There was nothing wrong with the business model. Do you know how much value was lost in Facebook the week of the Cambridge Analytica scandal? Do you know how much? Do you want to give it a guess? How much money was destroyed? How much value was destroyed by Mark Zuckerberg's failure to run his business correctly? $80 billion went down the tube for that week. That's the market cap of Coca-Cola. That was a governance failure. That was Mark Zuckerberg. Another challenge that we might want to think about as a board is understanding that ESG issues, environmental, social, and governance issues, should matter to you because they matter to the public. Okay? It doesn't matter what you think, it's about what the public thinks about these issues. I was very taken by the chief executive of Topshop, one of our top fashion brands in the UK, saying they were no longer going to take material from sweatshops in Bangladesh and India and so on. And the interviewer said, "Why are you even bothered about that?" And he said, "Because our customers are bothered about it, and if we don't do it, they're going to stop coming into the shop." Climate change. Everywhere is now announcing a climate change emergency. as Mauritius, as your board, announced a climate change emergency? Because you are going to be out of position fairly soon if you don't. Have you read the news about the wildfire, the bushfires in Australia, around Canberra and around Sydney, which are genuinely threatening the livelihoods of those two cities, invoked by climate change? Demographic and workforce transformations, exponential changes in digital technology, what I was talking about earlier, artificial intelligence, blockchain, and so on. Increasing geopolitical instability. Every time I fly into the Gulf, I wonder if I'm going to get there safely because of what is happening between Turkey and Syria, what's happening in South Yemen, what is happening with the blockade of Qatar. Every week there is a new development in the Gulf which represents geopolitical instability. How many of you are doing business with parts of the world which are now becoming increasingly unstable? And then finally, I'd finish with what Michael was talking about, the focus on the restoration of trust. These are board-level discussions which need to be had. And when I work with boards, I say, show me your minutes and show me your agendas for the past year, and I will show you that you have not discussed any of these business-critical issues. You've discussed your operations, you've looked backwards, and you've looked inwards, and you've not looked forward, and you've not looked outwards to see whether you can reposition your business through these issues that are facing us. So I'm not being doomsday, I'm not trying to frighten any of us. These are the issues that are putting companies out of business. And it's the job of the board to reposition the business. It's the job of the board to be focusing almost non-stop on strategy. And nearly all the boards I work with, they don't spend any time at all on strategy. I was asking these delegates today from African countries, how many of you do an away day on strategy? How many of you do an away 2 days on strategy? Not a single one of them. How many of you have got a risk matrix? Not a single one of them. How many of you have got a board skills matrix? What's the board skills matrix, Seamus, they ask. This is the state of preparedness of boards all around the world. And the way of calling that out is through board evaluations. It's actually going in and kicking the tires and seeing whether the board is fit for purpose and fit for the future. So fit for purpose now to survive the next business year, fit for purpose in the future in terms of what's coming down the tracks. So the work I do, and there's different methodologies set out in the paper which PwC and MIoD have produced, and you'll have a chance to read that when you pick up the paper, and for those of you who come to the workshop on Friday, we'll have a further discussion on it. But just for the sake of getting practical, I just wanted to say what I do, just so that you can know the way it can work. And I place that in the context that we're having a major discussion in the UK now about board evaluation. And we are preparing a code of practice, which again will be the first in the world, on how to conduct a proper board evaluation. The reason we're doing that is my institute, which is doing that work, is because one of our big firms went bust, Carillion, a construction company. Have you heard of it? FTSE 250 construction company. It went bust. Unlike Thomas Cook, which only went bust a month ago, and unlike Patisserie Valerie, which went bust 6 months ago. You know, this is in the country which has a UK corporate governance code. And when they looked into why had Carillion gone bust, why this major contracting firm offering defence services, hospital services, school services, prison services to the government and to wider society, why had it gone bust? What had the board evaluation said about the board of Carillion PLC? And when they looked at what had happened with the board evaluation, they found that the firm involved had conducted an electronic board evaluation, which leaves pretty limited scope for discussion and interaction with board directors. The firm had not met a single director, it hadn't met the chairman, it hadn't sat in on a board meeting or a committee meeting. The whole thing had been done remotely. That firm was mentioned in the Financial Times and the Sunday Times, and its reputation was rubbished for the work it was doing. And so the government said, we've got to up our game on board evaluation. So they initiated an exercise, and we are about to produce a code of practice in the next 3 months, I would say, or after the election. And I am a representative of the island of Brexit, unfortunately, at the moment. But once we finally get back to doing some proper politics, we'll publish that code of practice. So what does a good board evaluation actually look like? It looks something like this, that the independent board evaluator goes and talks to the chair, and probably the company secretary, and devises a bespoke questionnaire which says, what are your issues? What do you want us to look at? We're here, you can choose at us, we'll leave afterwards. What do you actually want us to look at during this next few weeks or next few months of this exercise? That questionnaire is then used as the basis for, in my case, a 2-hour face-to-face interview with each director going through that questionnaire. Going through the questionnaire allows us to cover certain material in common with each director, and it allows each director to go off-piste wherever they want to go on the subjects that we're discussing. I asked to sit in on a board meeting and or a committee meeting only once in all the time I've been evaluating boards has that been forbidden, because the chairman was very cautious and conservative and didn't allow me to do it. But otherwise, you can't really observe board behaviours unless you're sitting in on a board meeting. I asked questions on a quant and a qual basis, so I marked them on a quant basis 1 to 7, but I'm mainly interested in the qualitative responses to the questions I'm asking. I review the board documentation to see if it's fit for purpose. If they want me to, I will go and talk to external stakeholders to find out what the investors, what the brokers, what the customers, what the regulators, what the politicians think about that company and its board. And I also offer them the opportunity, if they want to do a peer evaluation, where I ask each individual director to comment in confidence on what they think about every other director on the board. I ask them to say a really positive thing about every other director, why they love having that director in the trenches with them at board meetings, and then I ask them to say something developmental. What would they like them to do more of? What would they like them to do less of? I put all that information together, and then I present a draft to the chair, and I say, this is what it looks like. And I give a copy to the company secretary to ask them to proof check it for accuracy. And then I seek to provide feedback, not in a formal board meeting, but in a social context, over dinner, over drinks. Because what I find is that the board evaluation brings the thinking to the next level, and if one then feeds back in an informal situation, it brings the thinking to the next level still. And the degree of alignment and honesty and truthfulness which you get out of the directors when you ask them direct questions is absolutely astonishing. And then when one feeds back, and there's no names, and unless somebody has used a word in the English language that only that particular director could have used, nobody will know who has said what. They see a true picture of their board. I've worked with some excellent boards. The best board I have ever worked with is a board from Manchester in England, in the UK, and I have worked with some pretty dire boards who need a lot of help. But that's the process, that's the way it can work. You can do it any way you like, you can take stuff out, you can put stuff in, but that's generally the way it works. And what it's helping the board to do is to get better, in the same way as the directors expect their management team to get better, in the same way as the management team expect their middle management and their workers on the shop floor to get better. So that's the process that I use, and there's other processes and there's ideas put forward in the paper which I think is a very useful, helpful, interesting paper which you'll want to reflect on and think what might work for you. But the big reason for me in doing this in Mauritius is, and I'll finish off on this point, is when I do work in another country, I go to indices like the World Bank Competitiveness Index and the World Economic Forum Davos Index to see where that country is. So I've just written the governance code for Seychelles. That was almost as pleasurable as coming to Mauritius. It's great fun. The President accepted the report in March, and that is now the formal governance code of the Seychelles. So, as with the so I decided to compare you with the Seychelles, which is another Indian Ocean competitor, and with South Africa, which is the leading economy in mainland Africa. Okay, to see where you are and what more you need to do to exercise regional leadership, because it's all about leadership. It's all about you making your economy the best economy in this part of the world. And you will know this, I'm sure, that out of about 200 countries in the world, the size of your economy makes you the 119th largest economy, I should say smallest economy in the world. You have a really small economy. Seychelles has a minute economy. There's only so much you can do as an island economy. But in terms of competitiveness, out of about 180 countries measured, you are 37th, which is an absolutely astonishing record. So you're the 113th largest economy in the world, and you are the 37th most competitive economy in the world, according to the World Economic Forum. In comparison, Seychelles is at number 81, South Africa is at number 76. And that's in terms of the institutions. Let me go back one. So at the moment you are 45th, sorry, apologies, you're 45th in the world at the most competitive economy. South Africa is 61 and Seychelles is 107th. If we go to the World Bank indices, out of 190 countries measured, Seychelles comes in at number 100, South Africa comes in at number 84, and Mauritius comes in at number 13. The 13th most competitive economy in the world. That is absolutely astonishing. That is really good news. 13, lucky for some. Okay. The point I want to make is you really need to build on that. If you want that regional leadership, and when I came into the airport, I saw this big, glossy, moving panel saying the most competitive economy in Africa. You're beating South Africa hands down. It's absolutely astonishing. The most critical way you can maintain that competitive advantage is to get your boards up to 100% performance level. And so board evaluation is not just an income stream for some poor consultants around the world who manage to do the consultancy in a very weak way, in a very poor way. It's not just a governance exercise. It's not just an innovation. It is actually a source of competitive advantage. And you are doing massively well, but you cannot rest on your laurels. And so I put that to you, that you might want to think about how are you going to improve your processes at board level, because your processes improved at board level will improve your operational performance, and they will improve your prospect for regional leadership. So I leave it at that. I'm very happy to take some questions on my own experiences, and thank you for listening.